The 9 Days and the Buried Kingdom. A ghost lies beneath a forgotten English manor, and she wore a crown for only 9 days. Her brief, tragic reign ended on the executioner's block. But now, a humble shovel stroke unearths the final, intimate secret of Lady Jane Grey's lost childhood. This is the true, astonishing history revealed when a team of archaeologists decided to dig deeper than legend. Chapter 1: The House Under the House. The story of the British Isles, a small cluster of land off the northwest coast of Europe, is not written on parchment alone. It is pressed into the mud, concealed in the ruins, and locked within the very bedrock of the islands. Every year, modern science strips back the layers, revealing astonishing truths about the ancestors who built, fought, and died here. This particular chapter of history began, as so many do, in a sleepy corner of the English countryside, Leicestershire. Here, in the sprawling, rugged beauty of Bradgate Park, lies the wreckage of a mansion known simply as Bradgate House. For centuries, local tradition and historians pointed to the crumbled brickwork of the large standing ruins as the ancestral seat of the powerful Grey family, and more specifically, the childhood residence of one of the most tragic and least known figures in British history, Lady Jane Grey. Her life was a cruel, brief flash of Tudor drama. Born in 1536, she was the great-niece of the infamous King Henry VIII, making her a crucial piece on the volatile chessboard of royal succession. A devout Protestant, she became a pawn in the religious power struggle that tore England apart after the Reformation. In 1553, at just 16 years old, the dying young King Edward VI, Henry VIII's son, bypassed his Catholic half-sister Mary and named Jane his successor. The result was inevitable, brutal, and swift. She was proclaimed queen, reigning for a mere 9 days before her auntie, Mary Tudor, rallied the Catholic nobility, deposed Jane, and locked her in the Tower of London. Execution followed shortly thereafter, sealing her legacy as the 9 Days Queen. For Professor Richard Thomas and his team from the University of Leicester, Bradgate House was supposed to be a straightforward dig, a chance to find everyday artifacts that might color in the details of Jane's childhood. But Richard, a meticulous and skeptical archaeologist, had a hunch. What if the widely accepted narrative was wrong? The large, visible brick ruins, which date to the early 15th century, had always been assumed to be the entire house. Richard's team started their excavation in the familiar footprint, peeling back the layers of rubble and decay inside what remained of the structure. "We're standing inside what was once a room," Richard explained, pointing to a section of fire-cracked tiles. "We found this fireplace, which told us we were looking at a domestic space, probably a kitchen." But the deeper the team went, the stranger the architecture became. They weren't just clearing a basement or a kitchen annex. They realized they were working on the foundations of an entirely separate, older house. This structure existed before the larger brick building that had stood proudly above ground for centuries. The house people had pointed to as Jane's home was a replacement built upon the bones of her actual childhood residence. This was a phenomenal discovery on its own, rewriting the architectural history of the estate. But what truly connected it to the ill-fated girl wasn't brick or stone. It was the mud. As they carefully cleared the floor layer of this earlier house, a small, dark disc emerged. It was a silver sovereign penny, small but unmistakable. Its minting date, as confirmed by Richard, fell between 1509 and 1547, spanning the reign of Henry VIII. That's important because it gives us a date firmly in the early to mid-16th century, Richard emphasized. We can say with a degree of confidence that these older walls were in use sometime during the first half of that century. Lady Jane Grey was born in 1536. When this coin was dropped and lost, she was just a little girl, perhaps 8 or 10 years old, running across this very floor. This wasn't just an artifact, it was a physical link to a single, ordinary moment in the life of a girl who, at that time, had absolutely no idea the power struggles of the English throne would demand her life. The dirt wasn't done talking. The team also unearthed objects that spoke to the Grey family's extraordinary status. They found the bones of peacocks and vast quantities of venison, confirming a high-status aristocratic diet. They also found fragments of a hand-painted jug imported all the way from the Netherlands, known as Majolica ware, telling a story of luxury trade connections. The fragment depicted a motif of the Passion of the Christ, the pillar where Jesus was whipped, a reminder of the central role religion played in their daily devout Protestant lives. Perhaps the most visceral connection to the past was discovered in a secluded area, a garderobe, the medieval word for a toilet. After careful excavation, the team confirmed they had found the cesspit, containing 600-year-old excrement. It has a strange smell that you can't really compare to anything else, the excavator noted in his diary, capturing the raw, unromantic reality of Tudor aristocratic plumbing. The collective evidence was irrefutable. Lady Jane Grey did not grow up in the house that became famous for her name. She grew up in the older, first unfortified aristocratic house in England, a structure that her powerful family had built to show off their modern status, only for it to be deliberately dismantled and covered up by later building projects. The traditional narrative of Jane's childhood, repeated for 4 centuries, was a myth. The truth lay 8 feet beneath the earth, sealed by a later floor, proving that her short, tragic life touched a home that history had completely forgotten. The 9 days of her reign defined her death, but these newly exposed stones defined her beginning. Chapter 2: The Silent Scream of the Stacking Dead, a leap to the 19th century. Leaving the political intrigue and hidden privilege of Tudor England, the historical lens of the dig turns sharply, leaping 3 centuries into a realm of utter desperation. We travel across the Irish Sea to Northern Ireland, specifically to the small county town of Downpatrick. Here, the subject is not royalty, but the absolute collapse of a society, the devastation wrought by the Great Famine and Gortamor. The 19th century was a time of immense hardship across the United Kingdom, but nowhere more so than in Ireland, where poverty and disease were compounded by an over-reliance on a single crop, the potato. The social structure for dealing with the poor were the Victorian workhouses, built ostensibly to provide housing and food in exchange for hard labor. Downpatrick's workhouse opened in 1842, designed for a maximum population of 500 people. The potato blight, a highly aggressive plant pathogen that first struck in 1845, decimated the crops and turned these workhouses into lethal, overcrowded hells. The site in Downpatrick was being excavated because the land was needed for access to a new school. Before construction could begin, the workhouse cemetery had to be meticulously excavated, the dead documented, and their remains respectfully reinterred. Dr. Nisha Mwini, the documentary's field archaeologist, joined the team, knowing this would be an emotionally grueling dig. Osteoarchaeologist Bethany Johnson was responsible for analyzing the bones as they came out of the earth. The very first observations were heartbreaking. The bones are simply not robust, Bethany noted, holding a fragmented femur. These people were malnourished. The skeletal structure clearly reflects a diet that was severely limited and insufficient to meet their caloric needs. The poor of Ireland had subsisted almost entirely on the potato, and when the blight hit, the Downpatrick workhouse population swelled immediately to 1,000, double its intended capacity. The sheer density and brutality of the famine were revealed in the grave cuts themselves. The team noticed that many remains were not single burials. They were finding 2, sometimes 3 skulls in a single small grave. "What's happening is the coffins were collapsing in on top of each other," explained Bethany. "They were buried in cheap, quick wood. The wood rotted and the skeletons compressed and intermingled." It was clear that the system, even with the best intentions, had been overwhelmed. The sheer volume of death had demanded a brutal efficiency, but the most horrifying find was yet to come. In one corner of the excavation, they reached a point of absolute maximum density. "We had 8 individuals stacked on top of one another," the supervising archaeologist confirmed. This stack was a chilling marker of the moment the crisis peaked, not just from starvation, but from disease. By 1847, just 2 years into the blight, a lethal combination of relapsing fever and typhus, known simply as famine fever, ripped through the workhouse population. The death rate accelerated so rapidly that the population collapsed virtually overnight. The team estimates close to 400 individuals were buried in this small, single cemetery plot. The archaeological facts were staggering. By 1849, 1 million Irish men, women, and children had died nationwide, and 2 million more had fled, many finding their way to America. The experience was deeply personal for Nisha Moini. "I'm only separated by a few generations from the person who was lying here," she observed, her voice quiet. "My father is Irish. This feels like excavating a bit of my own history." The Downpatrick dig became more than just an excavation. It was an act of reckoning with a national trauma, a definitive and shocking physical record of the human cost of poverty and famine in the 19th century. Chapter 3: The Gateway to Hell and the Witches' Panic, a twist of superstition. The next discovery takes us on a journey backward in time, from the stark reality of the 19th century workhouse to the visceral, enduring power of superstition and fear in pre-modern Britain. The location is Cresswell Crags, a dramatic limestone gorge on the border of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. Cresswell Crags is an ancient, hallowed place. Its caves have been studied for over a century, famed for containing evidence of human activity dating back over 10,000 years, including spectacular Ice Age art. But the newest, most astonishing discovery wasn't thousands of years old. It was hiding in plain sight, dismissed as mere noise. The walls of one deep, dark cave chamber were covered in hundreds of strange marks scratched into the rock. Early 20th century archaeologists, including the famous Albert Leslie Armstrong, had cataloged them as simple, meaningless graffiti. The truth was revealed in 2019, when a pair of amateur symbologists visited the site. They immediately recognized the patterns that the professionals had missed. These were not teenage scrawls. They were apotropaic marks, or witches' marks, symbols used for protection against evil spirits. We realized they were quite important because there were so many of them, and they were in such a concentration in one particular place, explained a member of the research team. The common symbols included the conjoined V, a reference to the Virgin Mary, and the Christogram IX. Crucially, the dates found among the symbols placed them firmly in the period of the English witchcraft trials, a time when fear of demonic influence was absolute. A belief in witches, fueled by King James I's treatise Daemonology, 1597, persisted for centuries, right up to the 19th century. These protective symbols were overwhelmingly concentrated in one specific chamber, a chamber notorious for a deep, gaping chasm in the floor. The press quickly christened this spot the gateway to hell. The logic of fear was clear. The draft blowing through that chasm would have been interpreted by fearful locals as the flow of evil air and spirits. If livestock were failing or if a child was lost, the immediate conclusion was an evil influence. Villagers would have rushed to the deepest, darkest point of the cave to frantically carve their symbols of protection, desperately trying to seal the portal and trap the evil air before it could contaminate their community. The sheer volume of marks, literally hundreds, scarring the wall all the way around, testified to the intensity of the panic and the enduring power of superstition. It offered a rare, chilling glimpse into the mind of the pre-modern villager, where the spiritual and physical worlds collided with terrifying frequency. Chapter 4: The Warrior Women and the Roman Antique, Anglo-Saxon Era. The narrative concludes by swinging to the period that follows the collapse of the mighty Roman Empire in Britain, the Anglo-Saxon era. On a wind-swept hilltop in Scribe, Lincolnshire, a major cemetery was discovered by a local metal detectorist. Dating to the 6th century AD, this was clearly a burial ground reserved for the most elite, high-ranking individuals in the community. The dig was led by Dr. Hugh Wilmot and his team from the University of Sheffield. The burials immediately spoke of status. Iron weapons, like an Anglo-Saxon sax, a large dagger, were found in male graves, suggesting warrior status. But it was the female burials that were the most spectacular and well-preserved. They contained high-status, exotic grave goods, including beautiful ivory rings, imported perhaps from Africa, and stunning rock crystal beads. The presence of girdle hangers, key-shaped objects worn at a waist, confirmed the comparatively high status of women in Anglo-Saxon society, who often held legal rights, including the right to own land. The season yielded several once-in-a-lifetime finds, but 2 objects stood out. First, from a female grave, the team unearthed an exquisite silver bracelet. "This is one of our star finds," Dr. Wilmot said. Holding the piece, which was so perfectly preserved, it looked as if it had been made yesterday. It's a very, very rare object. There are probably only about a dozen known nationally. The bracelet was clearly a piece of inherited wealth, a heavy, high silver content artifact designed with an intricate punch decoration, symbolizing the immense wealth and regional power of the woman buried with it. But the most compelling connection to the wider sweep of British history came from another grave. Tucked among the grave goods was a small, vibrant vessel, a spectacular bronze and enameled bowl. Dr. Wilmot confirmed its origins. It was unequivocally Roman. He explained, it probably dates to the 2nd century AD. That means it was buried in this Anglo-Saxon grave 400 years after it was made. The bowl was an antique. The original red, green, and blue enamel work cast in shiny bronze must have been a breathtaking object in the 6th century. The fact that the Anglo-Saxons buried their most prized dead with an artifact from a long-vanished civilization showed a profound, complex respect for the past and a desire to connect their own emerging identity to the mystique and power of the former Roman Empire. This community, far from isolated, was wealthy, well-connected, and deeply aware of its place in the long historical lineage of Britain. Chapter 5: The Lost Hall of the Norse Chieftains, Viking Era. The final chapter takes us to the far northern reaches of Britain, to the Orkney Islands off the coast of Scotland. This region holds the deepest ties to Scandinavia, where the Vikings settled and established the North power base detailed in the Orkneyinga saga. The dig is on the island of Rousey at an abandoned farmstead known as Scale. Archaeologists from the University of the Highlands and Islands had previously noted a massive, long wall running beneath the 17th century farmstead. The scale of the wall, nearly 5 feet wide, placed it firmly in the Viking era, circa AD 800 to 1200. The burning question was simple: was this the site of a long-lost Viking drinking hall? The excavation confirmed that the wall was part of a huge rectangular structure, a longhouse over 65 feet long. It was far too substantial for a typical farmhouse. This was a seat of power. The team uncovered the central feature, a hearth, fire pit, running down the middle of the room, the source of light, heat, and communal life. As they sifted the floor layers, the artifacts poured out. Domestic items like soapstone spindle whorls, personal items like bone combs, and perhaps most importantly, iron slag. This slag proved the inhabitants were not just farmers, but skilled craftsmen, producing their own tools and weapons on site. The final piece of evidence came in the form of a fragment of a cruciform pen, unmistakably Scandinavian in style. This Viking longhouse was the definitive physical proof of a wealthy, powerful Norse community in Orkney, a base for the chieftains mentioned in the ancient sagas. The discovery provided a perfect, thrilling end to a year of digging that had stretched from the tragic, privileged past of a 9-day queen to the iron-willed survival of the Vikings on the very edges of the known world. The history of the UK, it seems, is an endless excavation, continually rewriting itself with every turn of the spade.